npower announces one of the largest price rises by a major energy supplier in years. Standard tariff electricity will cost 15% more from next month. The government says customers are already paying more than they need to.
We would like to see more done, in particular for vulnerable and low-income customers, to get them off these expensive deals.
Well, 3 million people will be affected. The government says it may act if customers are not treated fairly. Also this lunchtime. The Prime Minister's in Malta for an EU summit. She'll brief foreign leaders about her recent meeting with President Trump and the government's Brexit plan. In Paris, a man armed with a machete is shot after attacking a soldier outside the Louvre. A warning that Russia's using cyber attacks to destabilise the West. And rebuilding bridges. Tadcaster's Bridge is about to reopen more than a year after it collapsed in the floods of Christmas 2015.
In the south, running out of time, the woman being prevented from leaving Dubai to come home for urgent cancer treatment. And bus or bust, the parents facing a threefold rise in the cost of getting their children to school.
Hello, very good afternoon to you. Theresa May is attending a European Union summit in Malta where she'll brief leaders on her recent meeting with President Trump. Downing Street says she wants relations with the EU to be more constructive and positive. Well, ahead of the talks, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the leaders needed to focus discussions on Europe rather than dealing with other parts of the world. Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticas is in Malta for us with more. Damien.
Yes, Kate, well, you join us. We're in a fortress, an ancient fortress perched here on the edge of Malta. And of course, the island sits in the Mediterranean on the edge of the EU. And this feels a very apt place for Europe's leaders to be meeting today to discuss the many challenges they see facing them.
Malta's ancient cannons. Europe feels threatened again. So this volley was an appropriate welcome to a summit of EU leaders who feel besieged, challenges on every side. Migration, terrorism, now Donald Trump's America. Theresa May arrived to deliver a message. She believes her nascent relationship with President Trump means she can be a bridge between Europe and America. That could be an asset dealing with the EU, but it could also become a liability.
Today we have pretty mixed feelings, honestly speaking, because the last steps we've seen, the tangible aspects of Mr. Trump's politics are a little bit are raising some concerns.
Europe's leaders are wary about Mr. Trump and what they see as his hostility to the EU, so they were keen to hear Mrs. May's first-hand impressions.
I do think that there is room for explanations, because sometimes I have the impression that the new administration does not know the European Union in detail, but in Europe, details matter.
And Lithuania's president, always to the point, added Europe didn't need a bridge. Today we communicate with the Americans on Twitter, she said. The sense there are threats all around is driving EU leaders to focus on the challenges they face. This meeting's agenda, the migrant boat still crossing the Mediterranean, and the EU's future after Brexit. Finland's Prime Minister told me there's no way trade with Britain will be as smooth once it's out of the EU.
Yes, of course, there will be a change, because being a part of single market, of course, there is no barriers at all. But making a trade agreement between European Union and UK, there will be some barriers anyway.
Soon, Theresa May will be negotiating with all these leaders. As she gears up for Brexit, she's facing an EU that under pressure is seeking to close ranks, shore up its defences.
All right, well, we can speak to Damien again now. It's not going to be easy for her, is it, with this Brexit elephant in the room?
No, it's not, but I think the leaders today will put that to one side. What several of them said on the way in was that they are very keen to hear from Mrs. May, her first-hand report of her meeting with Donald Trump. That is one of the huge issues facing the EU, what to make of the new president, what to make of his pronouncements and his policies. But it is important, I think, this point, that while that is something of an asset for Theresa May, it is also tricky for her. The French president went into the meeting saying that countries should remember that their first priority was within the EU, wasn't some relationship, he said, with the US. And so EU countries faced by all of these pressures, the new administration, the migrant crisis here, migrant boats still crossing the Mediterranean, there is a sense that they are seeking to try to find ways to work better together. And the Finnish Prime Minister said that to me. He said they want to focus on the things where they can deliver more and where they can close ranks. And that is an important message, I think, for the UK.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Damien. Now, the energy company npower has announced one of the largest single price rises implemented by a Big Six supplier. Standard tariff electricity prices will rise by 15% from next month, gas prices by almost 5%. Nearly 3 million people are expected to be affected. The company blames increases in wholesale energy costs and the cost of delivering government policies such as smart meters and the renewables obligation. It also adds it's the first time it has raised prices in 3 years. Just 2 weeks ago, the regulator, their Ofgem, had told suppliers they should absorb the costs of wholesale price rises by buying energy in advance. Well, our business correspondent John Moylan now explains.
It can be complicated. Energy shouldn't be.
Try telling that to npower's customers. From next month, 1.4 million of them are facing a big jump in energy tariffs. npower says it's the first major rise in more than 3 years. It's blaming rising wholesale gas and electricity costs and the impact of government policies like the rollout of smart meters. The price hikes mean npower's dual fuel customers will pay an extra £109 a year. That's up around 10%. It includes an increase of 4.8% on standard gas prices and a whopping 15% increase on standard electricity prices.
This is a significant price rise that will cost 1 million of npower's customers nearly £100 a year more on their energy. So customers really need, now more than ever, to look around to get the best deal for their energy.
It's not the first of the big suppliers to move. EDF's customers will pay around 8% more for electricity from the 1st of March. Today, some warned that other firms may follow suit, adding to pressure on household budgets. But the energy regulator has criticised the move, saying we don't see any case for significant price increases where suppliers have bought energy well in advance. npower must therefore justify the decision to its customers. And npower's move could spark a political row too, by highlighting the rising cost of government policies like subsidies for wind farms. Today, the Department for Business warned that where markets are not working, it is prepared to act.
Well, John joins us now, as you can see. Strong language from the government, actually, and says it will act if customers are being treated unfairly. Are they on a collision course now?
Well, it's unusual for the government to talk about specific companies, but today it has said that it's concerned by npower's plans to increase prices and making that point that where markets are not working for customers, it's prepared to act. Now, the reason why it's concerned is because energy bills are a big part of household expenditure, and the government knows that this plays into the whole debate about the millions of households that are just about managing. The government's particularly worried about the 2/3 of households that are on standard tariffs. These are loyal customers, they haven't switched, and they end up paying more for their energy than people who are on fixed tariffs, for example. But the companies are telling me that they are facing cost increases that they have to pass on. So it's not just wholesale price costs, but those government policy costs as well, like for green energy, renewable energy, the rollout of smart meters, and this new thing, the capacity market, which helps to keep the lights on during the winter. And those costs are going to hit loyal customers the hardest. Big question, what will the government do? We've had a 2-year investigation into the energy market. In the end, they stepped back from actually protecting those loyal customers. If we get all the other companies increasing prices too and hitting those loyal customers, will the government wonder, does it need to step in and act and help them?
We shall have to see. All right, thank you, John. A French soldier has shot and seriously wounded a man who attacked guards at the Louvre Museum in Paris. A police spokesman said the man, who was wielding a machete, had shouted "God is greatest" in Arabic. The French Prime Minister said it appeared to be a terrorist attack. France is, of course, still in a state of emergency because of the attacks in Paris and Nice. Our correspondent Johnny Diamond has sent this report.
In the heart of the French capital, outside one of its greatest treasures, the Louvre, an attack in broad daylight.
We heard gunshots. We didn't know what it was. Then we evacuated the employees and we left. That's what happened. We were stressed. Some colleagues were crying. We were afraid. We're panicking.
It happened very fast. Really, it all went quickly. Everyone was panicking. We thought of our lives. We saw death coming for us with everything that's been happening at the moment. We were very, very scared.
The reason for the shots? A machete attack by a man on soldiers guarding the area, explained a police spokeswoman.
In the commercial area, the man threw himself at the soldier who was there, armed with at least one knife or bladed weapon, possibly two, with the appearance of a terrorist. The soldier was injured. His colleague fired at least 5 rounds and 1 bullet hit the individual. He was seriously injured, very seriously injured in the stomach area.
France has seen much like this and worse before. In attacks in 2015, first 12, then 130 were killed across Paris. 6 months ago, more than 80 were killed in Nice. Both times the attacks were claimed by Islamist terrorists. Before he launched his attack, the man called out Allahu Akbar. In Arabic, God is great. An attack of a terrorist nature, said the French Prime Minister, as the Louvre was cleared and closed. Johnny Diamond, BBC News, Paris.
President Trump has continued his Twitter attacks against Iran's test launch of a ballistic missile, warning the country it is playing with fire. Mr. Trump said his predecessor, Barack Obama, had been kind in making a deal with Tehran over its nuclear program, and he added Iran had been put on notice. Well, Tehran responded, saying, "We will never use our weapons against anyone except in self-defense." Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Washington, Kim Gattas. Kim, we are now at the end of a week of this sort of language. How are we to assess the comments Mr. Trump has made?
Yes, well, it's quite the day when a tweet by the Iranian foreign minister is more measured and diplomatic than a tweet by the American president. It started at 6 in the morning already, 6:25 this morning, with this latest tweet from President Trump saying that the president, his predecessor, had been too kind towards Iran. And as you say, it has been quite a week of upheaval in American foreign policy, with not just America's foes being put on notice, but also its allies. We had this very tense conversation with the Australian Prime Minister yesterday. We had tense conversations with the Mexican president. But the question now is reality setting in? Is the president being tempered by his cabinet secretaries? Because at the same time as he's rewriting the textbook on American foreign policy, his cabinet secretaries are sounding a very different tone. We have the Secretary of Defense in Asia reassuring allies about the steadfastness of the relationship between the US and its allies in Asia. We have the US ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, saying that although the United States would like better relations with Russia, it also condemns Russia's actions in Ukraine. And then a statement on Israeli settlements being built in occupied land, Palestinian occupied land, with a statement saying that the United States would like to caution Israel against building more settlements. However, it also did add that settlements were not an impediment to peace, and that is a departure from long-standing American statements and long-standing American policy on the issue of settlements. So President Trump rewriting US foreign policy, sounding belligerent, but also a bit more traditional, and of course the world hanging on his every word and every tweet.
Kim, thank you very much indeed. Well, while the president then has commented on Iran's nuclear capability, his new Defence Secretary, James Mattis, has said the US will deliver an effective and overwhelming response if North Korea uses nuclear weapons. Well, he's been speaking at the end of a 2-day visit to South Korea, and the new Defence Secretary said any attack on the United States or its allies would be defeated. Our Seoul correspondent Steve Evans reports.
What to do about the nuclear arsenal being developed in North Korea? That's the problem facing the Americans, Japanese and South Koreans. Kim Jong-un tested 2 nuclear devices last year and is making progress towards getting missiles capable of, in his words, turning Washington and Seoul into a sea of fire. Mr. Mattis is doing a reassurance tour, his first foreign foray of the Trump administration. "We stand side by side" was today's message in South Korea.
Any attack on the United States or on our allies will be defeated, and any use of nuclear weapons would be met with a response that would be effective and overwhelming.
There are 28,000 US troops in South Korea. The American threat to retaliate with massive force if attacked will not be news to Kim Jong-un. The bigger question is whether to talk to the North Korean leader, to try to persuade him to abandon or limit the size of his nuclear arsenal. On that, the Trump administration is so far silent. Stephen Evans, BBC News, South Korea.
OK, it's 16 minutes past 1 and our main story this lunchtime. npower puts up some electricity prices by 15%, one of the biggest by a Big Six energy supplier for years. And still to come, will England be the team to beat again? They kick off their Six Nations campaign at Twickenham tomorrow.
And in South today, the crisis in GP recruitment, a look at the radical alternatives some surgeries are using to make sure patients are seen. And swapping the studio for a stage, BBC Radio Solent presenter Julian Clegg celebrates 20 years on his breakfast show.
The only road bridge linking the two halves of the North Yorkshire town of Tadcaster will reopen later today. It was destroyed by severe flooding more than a year ago, and people living and working in the town have faced a long detour to get across the River Wharfe. Well, our correspondent Danny Savage reports.
Opening day of Tadcaster's road bridge, 13 months after it was swept away. They were working right up to the last minute, putting the surface down. There's a will to get traffic going across it from the moment it's finished.
Go on, get going.
The destruction of the ancient crossing was one of the defining images of the 2015 winter floods. The force of the River Wharfe caused it to collapse. It left the town completely divided. An 18-mile round trip was required to get from one side of the river to the other. After several weeks, a footbridge was put in place, partially solving the problem.
I think the footbridge has been great. People have talked to each other, and instead of just waving to each other from the passing car as they're crossing on the bridge, the people of Tadcaster have stopped to talk to each other. It's been great.
But it hasn't been so great for businesses. They've lost trade and have been desperate for the road bridge to reopen.
I live on the east, I have a business on the west, I do school runs every morning. So to get us back as one community instead of divided is just amazing. It's a really, really good day.
It's been devastating for the town. It's broken the community in two. Families have been split up. Parents live on one side, children live on the other, grandparents, grandkids. And it's been, for some people, it's been a really difficult task, getting from one side to the other.
One thing residents are still concerned about, though, is the risk of flooding. That bridge may be rebuilt, but they're worried that it could happen again. The footbridge will vanish in the near future.
1, 2, 3.
So people were grabbing souvenir photos to recall the 13 months this town struggled to get by. Danny Savage, BBC News, Tag.
Britain's vegetable shortage continues now, then, with some supermarkets rationing the sale of produce. The shortage is due to bad weather, particularly in Spain, where there's been snow and now the worst rainfall for 30 years. Tesco and Morrison's are limiting customers to 3 iceberg lettuces. Morrison's are reported to be preventing shoppers from buying more than 3 heads of broccoli. Frankie McCamley reports.
They're part of our staple diet, and we have them with almost every meal. So for many, vegetables are not considered a luxury. But with poor growing conditions in southern Europe, the iceberg lettuce is the latest vegetable to fall victim to the shortage. It was courgettes last month. So much so that supermarkets have been selling out and are now restricting the number we can buy to 2 or 3. The rations aren't targeting us when we go for our weekly shop. Let's face it, who can get through these 3 lettuces in a number of days? What they're trying to do is stop small businesses from buying in bulk when they're facing shortages. And for weeks, some market sellers have struggled to get their hands on the lettuce.
Yeah, you can't get it, and whatever you get is very expensive, that's all. And it's affected aubergines, lettuce, courgettes, Chinese veg. It's gone through the roof. When it goes like that, I just back off.
And this is the reason for the shortage: severe weather in Spain. It's where the majority of the UK's vegetables come from during the winter months, but crops have been damaged, which has meant a poor harvest. And if things don't change there, back here, prices of some vegetables may continue to rise.
What we have to do, well, what I do, is buy what I can afford. Well, the £1.49, I thought it's got to be, should be surely 49p. They've obviously marked it up wrong, but I didn't question it. I didn't really realise there was a shortage.
It's not clear how long rations on one of the country's favourite salad vegetables will last, but if things don't change, it could be for months. Frankie McCamley, BBC News.
10-year-olds are being used as gun runners by gangs in Liverpool, according to police. The comments come as police staged a show of strength in the city with a high-profile police operation in some of the areas worst affected by a spike in gun and gang crime. Our correspondent Helena Lee reports.
2 victims of gun crime in the past week in Liverpool. On the left, 26-year-old Aaron Lewis, who was shot on Wednesday. Thomas Baker on the right was killed last Friday. This was last night in Liverpool. Police out in big numbers, heading to the most problematic areas in the city, targeting gang and gun crime and making arrests. Police say there's been an influx of new weapons in the city, and gangs are targeting the most vulnerable to help them get away with their crimes.
We are aware of people as young as 10 who are being coerced into storing and minding firearms for criminal groups.
Gun crime in Liverpool is on the rise. Since last April, there's been a 28% increase in shootings compared to the previous year. 4 men have been shot dead since last April, and there have been 79 incidents involving firearms, leaving 27 people injured. Police operations in the city are continuing in the light of the rise in gun crime. But the police say they can't do it alone. They need the community to help them bring those responsible to justice. Helena Lee, BBC News.
The Defence Secretary is warning that Russia is using sustained cyber attacks to target democracy and infrastructure systems in the West. Sir Michael Fallon says Moscow is weaponising misinformation in an attempt to destabilise NATO. Our correspondent Daniel Bircher reports.
Attacks in cyberspace, a risk to personal data, to infrastructure, and there are increasing concerns about the dangers of what's being termed cyber warfare as a risk to national security. In a speech, the Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has accused Russia of carrying out a sustained campaign of cyber attacks against the West.
We find ourselves dealing with a country that in weaponising information has created what we now see to be the post-truth age. Finally, there is the use of cyber weaponry to disrupt critical infrastructure and disable democratic machinery.
The Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America.
Russia stands accused of meddling in the American presidential election. US intelligence claiming that was sanctioned at the highest level, though that's denied by the Kremlin. And Germany believes hackers working for Russia targeted its parliament in 2015. The Defence Secretary's warning about Russia follows comments made by the NATO Secretary-General last week.
I trust the reports we have seen from many national intelligence services, including from Germany, United States and others, that Russia is behind many of the cyber attacks. And we have seen the same pattern against, for instance, NATO's own cyber networks.
Meanwhile, an influential group of MPs has warned that the government needs to raise its game to counter cyber threats. The Public Accounts Committee says ministers haven't consolidated what it calls an alphabet soup of agencies and that they're struggling to find enough people with the right skills.
If something goes wrong, it could close down hospitals, we could have a loss of important data. There are some serious things that can happen now with the skills of some of the hackers out there.
The Cabinet Office says the government has acted with pace and ambition, with a national strategy backed by £1.9 billion of investment. And the National Cyber Security Centre, which has been running for 4 months, says it has transformed how the UK deals with cybersecurity. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Cuts in disability benefits should be delayed until the government clarifies how it will support those in need of extra money. The Work and Pensions Select Committee says they found there was little evidence that lower payments would motivate people with disabilities to find work. Our correspondent Seema Katecha reports.
There's a lot of things to think about with your CV.
A group of disabled people are being taught how to write a CV properly. They're all unemployed, and some are worried about the disability allowance cuts coming into force in April. Bob suffers from inflammation of the spine.
People need that money. They need the help. Like I did, I needed it for mobility. Obviously, people with different things wrong with them, it's a help to them as well.
Today's report calls on the government to postpone reducing the amount of cash given to those who can't work because they're ill or disabled.
All these here fall into what the government calls the work-related activity group. They're those who can't work at the moment but are judged capable of returning back to work at some point in the future.
And it's those who will be put into this category that will be affected. At the moment, they're being paid £102 per week, but from April, the amount will go down to £73, bringing it in line with the job seekers allowance rate. Only new claimants will get this amount. Leslie suffers from depression and has a bad back.
Losing another £30 is making actually people worse off, and that's why a lot of people are actually landing up, actually sort of turning really like to crime and that, like to leave, like and support the families, the children.
So the personal profile...
But MPs say they want clarity on how the government will help those in this group who won't be able to make ends meet because of the changes.
What we're beginning to see in Britain is the emergence of destitution, of people ground down at the very bottom. And we're anxious that those people, disabled people who cannot make the jump into employment, which the government wishes them to make by cutting their benefits, to ensure that these people are protected properly before this grand strategy is rolled out.
Ministers argue their welfare reforms are increasing the incentives for people to get into work. They say they're giving extra money to those who need it because they're disabled. Seema Katecha, BBC News, West Bromwich.
Now finally, on the eve of Rugby Union's Six Nations tournament, the big question is, will England be the team to beat? If England do win all of their games, as they did, of course, last year, they'll set a new rugby record for consecutive victories. The rivalries will be intense, as our sports correspondent Joe Wilson reports.
Winter's evening, West Yorkshire. On stage, the man who says he started it. Joe Stead doing a song he heard in a folk club and then sung at his rugby club in February 1960. Swing low. From there it was learned, repeated and over decades transported to Twickenham. And the song, whatever its original meaning, is now England's celebration. In 2016 they won every match. 5 more wins would set a new world record, yeah, but there are 5 other nations with huge motivation.
Who can beat them? Well, that remains to be seen. I think it's going to be a tight championship this year, and you know, any team that comes up against England will want to try and take their scalp, so we'll wait and see.
Exactly. Well, Scotland start this Six Nations at home confident, but play Ireland, and they're highly rated and buoyant. Ireland beat New Zealand last autumn. Wales are vastly experienced. Even their new captain, Alan Wynne-Jones, has over 100 caps.
But there is something new for everybody at this year's Six Nations. For the first time, bonus points are available in the tournament as a reward for try scoring and attacking play. But fundamentally, rugby remains a contact sport.
England's captain hasn't played since December. Dylan Hartley's been suspended, sent off for this. And referees will show more red cards to get rid of this kind of dangerous play. I wondered how Hartley would adapt.
If you want to win games of rugby, you've got to be right on the edge, you've got to be confrontational and physical, because that's the ABCs of rugby, has been physical, isn't it? So look, we prepare well, and
Have you had to learn about where that line is, Dylan, more than other players, do you think?
No, I think we're always learning. If you're regarding the recent ban I had, player safety is paramount, so look, as players we have to change.
Laser beams and innovation, rugby knows its image is crucial, but the Six Nations is defined by tradition as much as change. So cue 7 weeks of sporting folk music. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Well, let's find out if the weather's going to be kind then. Phil Avery has joined us. Hello.
I think if you've got a ticket for those matches, you won't really care. Our weather watchers, they're great, aren't they? Look at this, Nairn, that made me very envious indeed. And the warm spots in the country thus far, 10 degrees or so. Our weather watchers, gosh, look at that. Isle of Wight, dreadful. You're too close, along with many others across the southwest, to an area of low pressure, which has produced a very wet start today across Cornwall, Devon, then getting up into the western side of Wales. That is but half the story related to that. Let's throw you forward a couple of hours. Maybe you're on the school run, that sort of thing, or off for the weekend. Decent enough across the north of Scotland, as we've already seen. The rain filling in across the southwest, the eastern side of Northern Ireland picking up on that rainfall too. And I hope you enjoyed the sunshine across parts of the Midlands, because it won't last. The cloud already, I suspect, filling in. So too to the southeast. And we come back into the southwest, where things have turned really quite cold just within the past couple of hours or so across the far west. 4 degrees, I noticed. A wee bit of hail and sleet in there too. Now, this is the other bit of the story about that low pressure. Through the course of the evening, southern coastal counties, 50, 60 mile an hour gusts as that circulation tries to lift itself up and across the British Isles during the course of the night. But before it goes, you'll have to contend with those sort of winds, so just bear that one in mind if you're out and about later on this evening. But the rain, with some hill snow, gradually working its way further north, and that strong wind as well. Leaving behind clearing skies with a peppering of showers perhaps across some western parts. But my concern is that having seen those temperatures drop, we may have a wee bit of ice first up if you're out and about first thing on Saturday morning. Now, that low pressure continues its 0-2 slow journey across to the northwestern corner of Scotland, and with it we've still got that combination of rain and sleet and some hill snow too. Northern Ireland just about poking out into something decent, so too the greater part of England and Wales, but you'll notice we've just got that cloud and rain flirting with the very far southeast on a markedly cooler day, and later in the day we'll just push some showers back into the west of Wales and the southwest of England, and then we managed to get rid of one low pressure, but the one in the southeast just gets this pincer movement going. It flirts with the eastern side of Scotland as we get on into the body of Sunday. The more southerly feature, a band of showers, tends to fizzle through the day, but it will have been a chilly start again. It will be a chilly day, despite the presence of quite a lot of dry weather with some sunshine. So there are some themes in that ever-evolving story. There will be spells of rain, but they tend to move, as you see. There will be some sunshine in the mix as well, but certainly both by day and by night, it will be a tad cooler than we've had it just in the past couple of days.
Thanks, Phil. Before we leave you, a reminder of our main story then this lunchtime. Npower puts up some electricity prices by 15%, one of the biggest by a Big Six energy supplier for years. That's all from the BBC News at 1. Goodbye from me and the team on BBC One. Let's join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.